when you think about it, you said that, and I agree with you that we have a hard time imagining the future. It's something we talk about on this podcast all the time. And what's what's wrong about that is that our future, even if you look at it realistically, even if you want to be realistic and doomy, well, Isa alayhi salam, Jesus is supposed to be coming down at some point in the future. And he's supposed to have his own Sahaba. So if you're sitting there reminiscing about, oh, I wish I was a part of the Sahaba of the Prophet, ﷺ, well, one of the top 5 messengers of all time is coming back. And you have a potential as a Muslim today to become one of his Sahabas, to become one of his followers. Some of the best Muslims are the ones towards the end of times. So it's not like we have to look at the past as the only time we could have been great. I think one of the things that doom us is that we no longer believe that we have the capacity for spiritual greatness, because spiritual greatness was reserved for the prophets and the messengers of the past, when we're forgetting, well, a prophet and a messenger is coming now, a Dajjal is coming now, a Debba is coming now, all of these things are coming now.
I'm glad you raised this point, because this gets into a very important conversation about Islamic philosophy of history. Right, so there's this idea which definitely has some grounding in the tradition. This idea of fasad zaman, right? Like time, like basically all of history, like history peaks with the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and everything since then is just downhill, right? Like that's a very common idea, right? In Muslim circles, that is the utopia, right? That was it. That was the peak, and
like
with every passing generation, we are getting further and further away from that perfect and pure light and truth. And so it's maybe even blasphemous to imagine a better future, because again, nothing can exceed or surpass that benchmark. And I think we really need to push back against this idea. I mean, again, the idea of fasad zaman, I mean, you can certainly find support for this in the hadith and in the writings of scholars in the tradition, but you also have different points of view, right? Like this does not have to be the only way to think about time within Islam. One very inspiring hadith that I always return to is the one where the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, he says, right, even if the trumpet were blown, right, so even if the hour was upon you, and you have a sapling in your hand, plant the sapling, right? So that's it, it's over, right? The world is literally ending, and you have a seed, plant the seed anyways, right? You say, what's the point? There's no point in planting the seed. There's not enough time for it to grow into anything. You just plant it anyways. So there's embedded in that hadith is sort of an ethos of defiant optimism, right? No matter how dark or gloomy or pessimistic the world may seem, you should retain some of that optimism. And another way of looking at this is, and I talk about this in the essay, there are actually Western scholars who have argued that Muslims, because of their faith, cannot actually really write science fiction. Right? Because they need to believe that utopia was only possible in the past, and it's not really possible in the future. And so there's this idea that Medina, right? Medina was sort of like the ideal society, and that happened in 7th century Arabia. So how can you talk about a theoretical city or civilization, 1,000 years from now that can be utopic? And my response to that is that I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding there, which is that Medina, and this might sound strange at first, but Medina is not in the past, and it's not in the future either, right? So Medina was the establishment of Medina was really the establishment of what we now call the Ummah, right? To come back to Saudi about dreaming the Ummah, right? There wasn't really one until the Prophet makes the Hijrah and migrates to Medina and then establishes Medina. And the memory of Medina is what keeps inspiring the renewal of the tradition, down the centuries, right? There's this desire to reach back and realize Medina, but you can only do it by moving forward, right? By reforming, by renewing. So Medina, in many ways, is a memory. It's an idea that sits outside of history and thereby causes history. And that's really what tradition is in general. Tradition is not something that it just sits in the past. Tradition is something that you're always drawing upon to renew yourself in the present, and repeatedly create the future through. So really, past, present, and future, they're all kind of like one thing in many ways. And so I think it's not helpful to get stuck in this discussion about, there's, where we take for granted these, even like the categories of past, future, present, and think about time, as a more continuous and even non-linear reality.
As a child, I used to